Snoke is, it was meant to be a pure blood Sith. And that's what it was meant to be. It was meant to reiterate the point that Jedi did not, they needed to learn from their mistakes. They needed to get true balance of the Force. And the true balance of the Force is not grey or anything like that. You can't, it's not good and evil, because evil is not the opposite of good. It's bad. Bad choices. People make bad choices. People think they do good, but they're doing bad. It's bad choices. As the tale says, the cosmic force will be in control of all its wills, and it doesn't mean it's free will, by the way, in which, religion takes. It just means its wills, whatever, what it does, the things it does, and it'll reward, and it will give to it what it does with it. So, if it's going, that's the thing when I'm saying that. Why the pure blood imprinted themselves on, because it's a lesson. The next Jedi messed with malevolent force and then got their just desserts and couldn't figure out why they were always being played. And that what would have happened is that when the only thing it does say right is that, it says that the whole Sith live in him and the whole Jedi live in her, because that is how it comes down to at the end, because they've all killed each other, they've all imprinted themselves in the end, and governing all that is those pure blood Sith who were at the very start of it. It's basically saying, well, you've opened that pot, so it's all coming out all over you now. You don't really, you're not wiping it off because you're too bothered, but you can't close the lid anymore. So what they can't close the lid anymore, so they leave it open and think, oh well, I'll just go with it now. But they're not realising that they're being when he's saying they've been consumed, it consumes you. That's what it's being consumed by.
Here's one of those videos that I knew would come one day, but I never really knew when it would come. I think this is very early from what I expected, but a surprise to be sure nonetheless, or somewhat. It actually kind of makes me upset reading it. So I'm going to talk about it with you guys, and of course there's no agenda, there's no hidden agenda in this video. I don't work for anybody, I don't work for any company. I'm a fan just like you guys, so my words are my opinion only, and let's get right to it. So in Disney CEO's Bob Iger's memoir, which Bob Iger is the CEO of all of Disney, The Ride of a Lifetime, Lessons Learned from 15 Years as CEO of the Walt Disney Company, released Monday, today, Iger reflects on Star Wars creator George Lucas's feelings upset and betrayed upon learning Disney intended to go in another direction and forego using his plots for the sequel trilogy following the company's 2012 acquisition of Lucasfilm. Now, I've got a lot to say about this. I've tried to be quite politically friendly and neutral on the channel when it comes to Star Wars, because of course there's just everyone's going to have an opinion of Last Jedi was this, Last Jedi was that. At the end of the day, you guys know that I wasn't a big fan of the film, but I've never been one to be like, just berating it, hating it, or, just praising it like it's God's gift. But in this video, I feel like I'm going to be a little more frank, especially now that I know this information. So at some point in the process, George Lucas told me that he had completed outlines for 3 new movies. He agreed to send us 3 copies of the outlines, one for me, one for Walt Disney Company Senior Executive Vice President Alan Braverman, and one for co-chairman Alan Horn, who'd just been hired to run our studio. Iger recounts, Alan Horn and I read George's outlines and decided we need to buy them, though we made clear in the purchase agreement, so in the contract, that we would not be contractually obligated to adhere to the plot lines he'd laid out. So they're like, yeah, these are good stories, we're going to buy them, but hey, we don't have to use them, but we'll buy them anyways. He knew that I was going to stand firm on the question of creative control, but it wasn't an easy thing for him to accept, and so he reluctantly agreed to be available to consult with us at our request. I promised that we would be open to his ideas. This was not a hard promise to make. Of course, we would be open to George Lucas's ideas, obviously. But, like the outlines, we would be under no obligation. Iger then details meeting with Lucas, screenwriter Michael Arndt, and Lucasfilm president Kathleen Kennedy at Skywalker Ranch to talk about their ideas for the film. George immediately got upset as they began to describe the plot, and it dawned on him that we weren't using one of the stories he submitted during the negotiations. The truth was, Kathy, The Force Awakens writer-director J.J. Abrams, Alan, and I discussed the direction in which the saga should go, and we all agreed that it wasn't what George had outlined. George knew we weren't contractually... This just makes me so upset, dude. Like, I've been a Star Wars fan since I was a little kid, since I was a little boy, and it was all under George Lucas's reign. And it was his story, man. Like, it just really makes me upset. George knew we weren't contractually bound to anything, but he thought that our buying the story treatments was a tactic promise that we'd follow them, and he was disappointed that his story was being discarded. I'd been so careful since our first conversation not to mislead him in any way, and I didn't think I had now, but I could have handled it better. I should have prepared him for the meeting with JJ and Michael and told him about our conversations, that we felt it was better to go in another direction. I could have talked through this with him and possibly avoided angering him by not surprising him. Iger then admits, now in the first meeting with him about the future of Star Wars, George felt betrayed, and while this whole process would never have been easy for him, we'd gotten off to an unnecessarily rocky start. Disney's sequel trilogy ultimately incorporated ideas that resembled Lucas. Lucas once envisioned a female Jedi Padawan, Kira, eventually materialized as Daisy Ridley's Rey, and an aged and exiled Luke Skywalker, played by a returning Mark Hamill. The story between an in-training Rey and reluctant teacher Luke in Rian Johnson's Star Wars The Last Jedi was inspired in part by Lucas's original concepts with the Jedi Killer character, that's Kylo, character imagined by Lucas earlier being realized as the Force Awakens villain Kylo Ren. Yeah, that has nothing to do with The Last Jedi. Lucas commented on his plans for the sequels in 2018. As Lucas told it, the trilogy was going to get into a microbiota world, which is true. George Lucas, so basically Star Wars, from what I have read and understand, Star Wars started out with a narration by the Wills. And these were, if you guys remember the Wills, the Clone Wars episode, this is who Qui-Gon learns. These beings are like these ascended beings. They're like priests, pretty much. They're like kind of like god figures. And they were watching the events of the Skywalkers kind of on their TV, or they were learning about them, which had already taken place in the past. That's why Star Wars says a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, because it's supposed to be from the narration or from the actually at least point of view of the Wills, of these ascended beings.
Having read the script, R2-D2 and C-3PO are the storytellers. They're minor characters, but they tell the story. We realized if he didn't have those characters, we didn't.
Where I was able to get other people to put their money in, studios. I wouldn't take it from real people. I'd only take it from corporations. So, it's a little bit of the Robin Hood thing.
Yes, I know. And it even says when I was reading it, I was thinking, I don't know if you've seen the things that we had off certain people on Elstree, early props and things that they were making, and surmising what the story would have been. And that's what we said. I have to have a retelling of that message to say to the next Jedi teacher that you've got to learn from the mistakes of the past. You cannot just go back to as it was and think, oh, it'll be all right, because it won't. Because that prophecy, it's easy to tell prophecy when you know the cycles. If you know the cycles and the repeating cycles, it's easy to tell prophecy. So even though the prophecy was done, had consequences, because none of them knew that they would have had children. And that is why the children and the grandchildren are always plagued by not just the Sith and those Ren Knights who are. So saying here that like prophecy of the Safari, the Sith are I. That's what this says and what they've said and what we've said before. That's what Plagueis would have been, and that Snoke would have been in the end, would have come out in the end. And then what would have to have happened at the end is that it would have been a brother and sister again, maybe twins or maybe not. It would have been said that Rey was really the sister of the other one, Ben, when the teacher Luke knew that there was something wrong. New Jedi who was teaching feel there was something wrong, some kind of rift in the Force that was plaguing not just his students but more his family, as if some kind of karma is coming back on him. And that's why he's supposed to have disappeared with Jedi. They should have disappeared with him, because no one ever asked the question. Well, I asked someone, what happened? How come there's no Force in tune people being born then, or is it through the Empire? I know it was only like 19 years or something between the two stages, which is a lot shorter than the time between the real one and the fictional one. It tells the same stories, whether it's in a space opera or it's here on planet Earth thousands of years ago. It's a motif, that's just a repeating theme. When these evolved beings learnt the ways of 5 pillars of nature.
I had made a decision to move ahead on the next Star Wars series, and we were starting to do that.
So you were starting to make the next Star Wars.
Yeah.
You as director, filmmaker.
So, and we were working with a writer. It wasn't quite working out, but I was also, I was also stepping away a little bit and turning things over to Kathy Kennedy. And so, what happened was Disney said, or Bob Iger said, gee, if you really want to sell your company, if you're thinking about selling it, because we were talking about retirement and what are you going to do after all this kind of stuff. And he said, well, if you really want to sell it, we're very interested. So that started that ball rolling. And I knew from, and I had the story treatments or, outlines. What happened was Disney said, gee, or Bob Iger said, gee, if you really want to sell your company, if you're thinking about selling it, because we were talking about retirement and what are you going to do after all this kind of stuff. And he said, well, if you really want to sell it, we're very interested. So that started that ball rolling. Tried to make movies where I step away. Just after about a couple of weeks, I knew I couldn't do that.